Good morning. I'm Andy Burrows. I'm on the board of Right Action, and our guest today is Dr. Raouf Mama, is brought to you by Right Action and, of course, the Brattleboro Literary Festival. I'm very pleased that Raouf is one of our authors here in Brattleboro at the ProLingua Associates. We have a book called Pearls of Wisdom. And I should say, so that he doesn't have to flog his own books, that we have some of his storytelling books, Pearls of Wisdom, and other things, some CDs of his telling stories back at the Everyone's Books table back there, along with his wonderful autobiographical memoir, Fortune's Favorite Child, which Raouf will be talking about today. It's an amazing read. I vouch for it. It was published by Northwestern University Press. It tells the dramatic story of his growing up in West Africa, in Benin, where he was born, to a fractured family. I'm giving away a little bit of the plot, Raouf. To a fractured family in a community which was both Christian and Muslim, and it was an interesting time in the history of post-colonial Africa, in the time of the development of Benin, and somehow this Fortune's Favorite Child managed to get through it all, get a brilliant education from the post-colonial educators who were there in the country, and ended up coming for his doctorate at the University of Michigan, and he has been a full professor, distinguished professor of literature down in Connecticut at Eastern Connecticut State University. So I won't spill out any more of the information on the story. I will leave it to Dr. Raouf Mama, who is a wonderful storyteller.
Good morning. Thank you, Andy. Thank you so very much. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Ray. I want to thank all those who worked so hard to make this festival possible and to bring me here. Thank you very much. I guess one of the things this book is about is the kindness of strangers and the redemptive virtue of the kindness of strangers. So I want to, I'll probably start this presentation with a little poem, not my own, which celebrates kindness. But I have to tell you just a little, an anecdote. I usually dress up like this when I have a presentation, but also, whenever the mood takes me, because it makes me stand out, and I love it. And one day I went to the filling station to get some gasoline, and someone drove up to me and got out of his car and said, "Sir, why do you have to come here in your pajamas?" And I said, "I'm sorry, it's not just pajamas, it's a traditional clothes from Africa." I said, "Oh, really?" Anyway, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the gift of your presence. The poem I want to start this presentation with is entitled Kindness. Kindness. It takes more than an apple to fill a basket. It takes more than an apple tree to make an orchard. But all it takes is one person for a little kindness to shine like an apple to be shared by all. I can't remember the name of the poet, but he's a French poet. And the poem has, I encountered it many, many, many years ago. And the moment I read it, I could recite it from memory for some reason. Anyway, I want to start this by reading from the beginning, because it all started with a dream I had. And it was a prophetic dream, really. We see much of our lives, our future, in our dreams. We may not be aware of it, but most of the time our dreams are prefigurations of our lives. I didn't meet my father until I was 20. It took my falling sick and the doctor telling me, get out of school, to find out who my father was and to meet him face to face a little later. So this is the opening of the story. It all started with a dream I had on the night of my 20th birthday. I was walking through the woods alone when I heard a dog barking. It was out of sight, but each bark sounded louder and nearer and ever more ill-tempered. Shivering, I tried to run, but my feet were glued to the ground. The next moment, the dog was upon me, growling furiously, its teeth bared, a wild creature of monstrous proportions, foaming at the mouth. Frantic with fear, I snatched up a stick that happened to lie a few inches away, but before I could use it, the mad dog knocked me to the ground and sank its fangs into my calf. It then ran off, its jaws dripping blood. I screamed and screamed as I clamped both hands on the gaping wound to stop the pain and stem the onrush of blood. Suddenly, a tall, elderly man robed in white appeared before me. "Please help," I cried. "I have been bitten by a mad dog." Gracefully, the man squatted down and, casting upon me a look of infinite sadness, he gently took my leg and cradled it a moment in his hands, his eyes closed, his thin lips moving in silent prayer. Then he took a little brown gourd out of his pocket, poured into the hollow of his right hand the potion it contained, and bathed my wound with it. The pain subsided instantly, for the contact of the potion with my skin was like the touch of the cool breeze blowing softly among the leafy trees and rustling the tall grass. The old man nodded quietly, his eyes shimmering with joy as I thanked him again and again. Gratitude made me bold, and seizing hold of my healer's wrist, I asked, "Who are you? Where do you live?" The man spoke not a word in answer to my question. Instead, he held me in his gaze a moment, then disengaged himself gently from my grasp, rose to his feet, and strode away. I wanted to run after him, but a power greater than my own will bound me to the spot. I tried calling after him, but my tongue flapped helplessly against the roof of my mouth. As though sensing my distress, my benefactor turned round in slow motion, his face veiled with a sad smile. With my last strength, I rose up and like a man possessed went racing after him, as though my very life depended on catching hold of him. But the faster I ran, the greater the distance between us grew. "Wait," I pleaded in desperation. "You have healed my wound, now take me with you." The man faltered a little, as though my words had cut him to the quick. But then, collecting himself, he resumed his stride, quickly waved me farewell, and was soon lost to sight. I felt lonely as a lost child, and out of the depth of my despair, I filled the void with my wailing. I woke with a start, bathed in sweat, my heart beating like a war drum. What manner of dream is this, I wondered, gasping for breath under the weight of sadness bearing down upon me. What manner of dream is this? And the sickness came upon me very swiftly. About 3 days later, the doctor told me, "Get out of school because you have no future, as a scholar. You are on the brink of a nervous breakdown." I came home and told my mom, and my mom said, "What does the doctor know?" "When your father comes home, I'm going to talk to him and we'll send you to Boyko to spend time with your elder mother." My elder mother was her elder sister, and everybody in the community called her Raouf's elder mother because the word aunt simply was inadequate. And I was closer to her than I was to my biological mother, was her younger sister. So I traveled to Boyko, which was about 250 miles away. And my father, he was my stepfather, but I had no idea he was my stepfather. He was my ride, and we spent about 6 hours cooped up in this car, in this truck, with nothing to tell each other because we didn't have a very good relationship. But I thought, well, I was one of those unlucky children whose father didn't love them. I did my very best. I was always top student at school. I'll come home with my report. My mother would burst into song and hug me close. But my father would just shrug his shoulders and say nothing. And one day I asked my mom, is he my father? Is he really my father? And she hesitated for a few seconds and then said, "Yes, he is your father." I found out later that he was not my biological father, but it took my falling sick to find out. I was taken to a healer. He was considered the greatest healer in the land. He was a clairvoyant healer. And he told my elder mom, he said, your son is sick, not with the sickness of the body, but with the sickness of the spirit. Take him to his father, and only then shall he be whole again. And he went on to talk about my father as a famous preacher, as a man of prayer, from whom I was separated, right at birth. I had no idea what he was talking about. And when we left his shrine, I looked at my elder mom and I knew that I was not allowed to ask her about this experience. I was not allowed to ask her a single question about what the healer had said. But I was really bursting with curiosity. I wanted to find out what he was talking about. So the truck driver, whom I had called father all my life, was not my father. What's going on? Anyway, I dare not ask my elder mom. And when we got home, I thought Papa, her husband, who was really the kindest man I had ever known. He was the first father figure I ever had in my life. He was, I thought to myself, maybe he would tell me what's going on. We got home, Mom pulled, Papa and took him to the bedroom, and they whispered together for a long time. And when Papa came back out, he wouldn't look me in the eye. He wouldn't answer any of my questions. And I knew then that there was a conspiracy of silence and that I had better join it. Okay, so I did. But I had a miraculous recovery, just as the healer had predicted, because he gave my mother a potion and said, give this to him twice a day. Within 7 days, the headache and the insomnia will subside. But if you don't take him back to his father, he will fall sick again, and I won't be able to help them. So I had a miraculous recovery 7 days later, and I was able to go back to school because I was supposed to sit for the college entrance exam, although the doctor had told me I may not sit for the exam. So after my miraculous recovery, I went back to the doctor and told him I had, been to a healer and I was well again. I had completely recovered. Could he give me permission to sit for the college entrance exam? He hesitated a few seconds and then shrugged his shoulders and said, okay, that's fine. If he had said no, I don't know what I would have done to him. Anyway, I want to read part of my account of my encounter with my father, because that day really stands as a watershed moment in my life. To be in the presence of my father was nothing short of magical. And I want to share with you part of my account of that experience. I was roused from sleep in the morning by my sister tapping on the door. Raouf, Raouf, wake up and get ready. Father must be waiting. She spoke barely above a whisper, and her soft voice felt like the touch of a feather on my eardrums. Daybreak already, I murmured sleepily, sitting up in bed and struggling to rub drowsiness from my eyes. I looked around in a daze, trying to collect my thoughts. I could hear my sister in the living room urging her eldest daughter to roll up the sleeping mats on which she and her siblings had lain, and to sweep the floor before early morning visitors started coming in. Having woken me up, my sister had thoughtfully withdrawn to the living room to allow me time to make myself decent. As the fog of sleep lifted, I remembered I was going to meet my father that very morning. I looked at my watch. It was 7:15. I had intended to rise with the dawn, but had overslept instead. My God, why didn't my sister wake me up sooner? I cried, jumping up from bed and grabbing a wrapper to tie around my waist. Then I rummaged in my suitcase for my toothpaste, my brush, and my towel, dislodging in the process the neatly pressed traditional clothes I had set aside to wear for the encounter with my father. To think that I have overslept this morning, of all mornings, I muttered under my breath, as I imagined my father waiting hour after hour in an agony of excitement while I slept dreamlessly, thoughtlessly on and on. The irony of it, I murmured, shaking my head as I thought of all the sleepless nights I had spent tossing and turning on my bed, waiting anxiously for the dawn, which I knew would bring nothing but more of the same despair. But this dawn, heralding the joyous birth of a new life of wholeness, of peace for my soul and hope for the future, this daybreak that would consummate my reunion with him for whom my soul had pined as a land parched with drought pines for rain, I had greeted with snoring and the forgetfulness of sleep. Here, I thought, is a humbling example of the unerring wisdom of one of the most memorable sayings Madame Dossou taught me and my classmates. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I took a quick shower using the sweet-scented soap my sister had placed in the soap dish for me, and I put on the bright-colored flower-patterned buba outfit and leather sandals I had bought for the occasion. I stood a moment before the mirror in my sister's bedroom, inspected my appearance briefly, and nodded with self-satisfaction. You do not look too bad, not too bad at all. Yet, when I came out into the living room where my sister had been waiting for me, I felt faint with fear of her making fun of me. My, don't you look handsome, she cried, clapping her hands in excitement, her face wreathed in a radiant smile. Her exclamation brought my sister's children and a few other children crowding into the living room, jumping up and down and showering me with shouts of joyful admiration. They were soon joined by a group of grown-ups who, following brief murmurs of conversation with my sister, stood nodding and smiling. For a few magical moments, I was the focus of attention in a company of laughing, admiring faces. The street was filled with the sights and sounds of human activity when my sister and I set out for the house where our father was waiting. Passers-by, going to and fro, singly or in groups of 2 or 3 or more, some talking animatedly and walking at a leisurely pace, some hurrying quietly by and wearing serious looks as though bent on urgent errands. Half-naked children romped about in the dust under the indifferent gaze of elderly men and women sitting on low stools or in rickety armchairs on the verandas of their modest brick houses, chatting quietly, roaring with laughter, or just sitting by themselves, puffing away at their pipes or munching on cola nuts in the manner of cattle or sheep chewing the cud. A woman with her baby strapped to her back walked unhurriedly along the street, carrying on her head an enormous basket overflowing with fresh-baked loaves of French bread. She looked now to the left, now to the right, crying in a high-pitched voice, "Pain chaud! Venez acheter du pain chaud! Hot bread for sale, folks! Hot bread for sale!" At the entrance of an elegant villa lined with neatly trimmed trees, a crippled, middle-aged man, blind in one eye, stood leaning upon a stick. He was singing a sad yet beautiful song about the transience of life, the certainty of death, and the eternity of bliss or grief awaiting every man and every woman on the other side of the grave. It was Ali the beggar, a man known throughout the neighborhood and beyond for his beautiful voice and the power of his eloquence. It was a common joke in the neighborhood that Ali had made begging into a highly sophisticated art form and was probably one of the richest men in town. My sister and I went to him, dropped a 25-franc coin each in his begging bowl, and went on our way. "Thank you, my beautiful lady, and thank you, handsome prince," he intoned, nodding in our direction and bowing low as he did so, a gentle smile disclosing two uneven rows of teeth stained brown by a lifetime of kola nut consumption. "May Allah's blessing be upon you all the days of your lives." "Amen," my sister and I cried in unison as we hurried away. "May Allah hear your prayer." I am much in need of Allah's blessing on a day such as this, I thought to myself, as my sister and I turned a corner and the house where my father was staying came into view. I looked all around, half fearing to wake from sleep and find that the sights, the sounds, and the smells around me and the house that had just come into view and wherein I knew my father was waiting were figments of a cruel, fantastic dream. But my fear lasted only a moment, for I knew in my heart that this was not and could not be a joke, that the bright glitter of the sun, the soft breeze upon my face, the very earth beneath my feet were as real as the love of a father or a mother for a child, as real as life and death and the presence of God. Deep in my heart I knew that the day that had been appointed for my encounter with the one who gave me life had come and that there could be no turning back. To those around me and to countless millions all over the world, this was just another day, and the sun blazing in the heavens was the same sun that had risen and set for thousands of years past, and that will rise and set for thousands of years to come. To me, however, that day was like no other. Never in my life had there been a day brighter with sunshine, more beautiful, more full of promise. It will stand forever in majestic splendor as the morning star of my life, a rainbow of dazzling light above the storm clouds of my earthly existence, and would inspire me with faith and hope as I reached for my dreams. Such were the thoughts going through my mind as my sister and I stopped in front of a small apartment in a big whitewashed building bordering a busy side street lined with leafy trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. "Assalamu alaikum," my sister intoned, calling out the traditional Islamic greeting as she and I kicked off our shoes and stood facing the blue curtain screening the interior of the apartment from view, which was flapping gently to and fro. "Wa alaikum salam," a sweet, resonant voice said in response. There followed total silence, during which a magic of suspense seemed to have hushed every sound of human activity and stilled every motion of men and beasts. The very curtain across the door had come to a standstill. Then the silence filled with the sound of feet shuffling near. I held my breath, and my heart, taking on a life of its own, knocked wildly against my chest. A mist stood before my eyes, and I felt faint with impatience. It was then that I saw the curtain lifting, and a tall, thin, middle-aged man motioned us inside, his ruggedly handsome face lit up with a warm smile. "Come in, beloved children, come on in," he crooned. "That's our father's cousin," my sister whispered hurriedly into my ear as the man stepped back to let us in. I caught sight of my father sitting on a chair a few yards away, dressed in a flowing robe of sparkling white, threaded with gold. He was holding in both hands a string of black prayer beads, and on his head a silvery cap of simple yet elegant workmanship glinted and shimmered. I stood rooted to the spot and gazed at the man, motionless and dumb. My father, too, seemed glued to his seat and bereft of the power of speech as he stared at me, his arms stretched forward, his lips parted in a joyous, enchanting smile. As I stared at my father, I was conscious of no presence except his, and I had a strange feeling that the fire in his eyes penetrated to the very marrow of my bones, suffusing my whole being with a sensation of warmth and happiness. Then I felt my tongue loosen and the power of motion return to my limbs as my father sprang from his seat with a cry of exultation and came bounding towards me. I met him halfway, and he enfolded me in his arms, saying over and over, in the manner of the mother lulling her child to sleep, "Raouf, my son, Raouf." Praise the Lord. This then was what I wanted to share with you from the memoir. And I want to thank you again for your attention, for the gifts of your presence. If you have any questions or comments, this is the time.
What happened next?
Well, I wish the moment would never end, because I just reveled in his presence. And then about 2 weeks later, I went home. I went to his village, which was also my mother's native village. It was my homecoming. And then I went to a prayer meeting, and it was just beautiful. And then time passed, and I found myself on a plane on my way to the US. And the custom officer at first was very unfriendly. And I felt as though I was being interrogated. He made fun of me at first. "How do you say your name?" I said, "Raouf, Mama, sir." He said, "Raouf, Mom?" With a grimace. I said, "No, not Raouf, Mom. Raouf, Mama, sir." And he looked at my passport and said, you come from the People's Republic of Benin. Are you a communist? I didn't know what to say. Just stood there, just quaking my shoes. And then he asked, what has brought you to these shores? And I mean, a moment ago, I couldn't understand what people were saying because I tried to eavesdrop on their conversations, but I couldn't understand a thing. And I panicked because I was on my way to the University of Michigan to do a master's in English. So if I couldn't understand what people were saying, so how was I going to make it? Well, I decided I was going to be kicked out by the end of the first semester. So I had to come up with a good reason for being kicked out, for going back home within 3 months. Because I had bragged to everybody that I was going to America for 7 years, that I would return home with my PhD in one hand and my master in the other. So if I should return home within 4 months, I'd better have a good explanation. So I decided I was going to, tell everybody that my American professors found me so bright that they decided to give me my master's and my PhD in 4 months. And I said, you are brilliant. You are a genius. Go home, serve your country. Your country needs you. Well, then I decided somebody was going to make a point of checking this out. So I better come up with a plausible lie. And that was what really absorbed me. I was so absorbed in the search for this plausible lie that I didn't know that the time had come for me to step forward and hand my passport over to the immigration officer. And someone had to call out my number, because you are assigned a number. Back in those days, you are assigned a number. Number 8! And that was when I woke up. And the officer, of course, tried to make fun of me. And then he asked, what has brought you to these shores? And I said, I have been admitted to the University of Michigan, sir. What for? I said, to study English and literature, sir. And he looked there was a gleam of bright in his eyes. He said, English, literature, and English, that's wonderful. I was an English major myself not so long ago. And he said, in a conspiratorial voice, one day, you'll be a writer. Me? That cannot be true. So I had to glance over my shoulder to check and see maybe somebody was standing behind me, because he couldn't be talking to me. No way. But there was no one. There was no one behind me. So he must have been talking to me, Raouf from Benin, who can't even speak English. A writer? In what language? How soon? How famous am I going to be? But of course, all that was going on in my head. And I stood there just smiling stupidly. And he stamped my passport and handed it back to me with a flourish, saying, welcome to America. And that's how the story ends. I haven't spot it for you today. There's much more in the book. But that was how that was really my first experience of an American soil. My experience of America. Welcome to America. And I don't know where that immigration officer is today. Wherever he is, may God bless him all the days of his life. You see, we have no idea what impact the words we speak can have on those around us. You never know. You never can tell. But that day, that immigration officer empowered me to go in pursuit of my dream. You see, we may have to walk to the ends of the earth in pursuit of our dreams. But as we go in pursuit of those dreams, the kindness of strangers renews our confidence, gives us strength and hope as we go chasing after our dreams. So, through you all, I want to thank this immigration officer, because as he spoke those words, I felt a burden lifting on my shoulders. Because if you believe you can do that, if you believe you can do something, then you can do it. You have to trust yourself. And sometimes there is no lack of friendly advisors to tell us exactly what our limitations are and what we can do and what we cannot do. But thankfully, there are also people who would, just by gesture, by, through word, they would give us encouragement and just urge us on, cheer us on. They may not even know it. And those are the ones who really make a difference. May we all make a difference to the lives of those around us. Yes?
I was fascinated when you talk about kindness and importance in your life and lifting the burden through kindness. I asked a Western culture kind of question. How did you raise the burden of your father being gone for 20 years to the point where you could accept him so graciously and wonderfully?
Well, I was, the night my mother and my elder mother told me the story, they told me the story of the custody battle between my father and them. Because the very day I was born, my father was notified. How? I have no idea. There was no telephone in those days, in the 50s, no telephone, nothing. And yet, news traveled faster than the speed of light. My father found out I was born and he traveled, 200 miles to the town where I was born, and he had brought a ram, because in the Islamic tradition, when a child is born, the father has to perform a naming ceremony by slaughtering a ram on the 7th day. So my father came with a ram and went to the hospital to greet my mom because my mom had run away. My mom had decided she had had enough of him. And she lived in hiding for 9 months. But upon hearing of my birth, my father traveled more than 200 miles. Went to the hospital, my mother drove him away. And my mother told me, although you looked just like him, I told him that you were not his son. Because if she had told him that I was his son, then she would have to go back with him. And she didn't want to do that. And she said, I knew that telling him that you were not his son was like pointing to a chicken and calling it a kitten. Because I looked just like my father. But my father, instead of going back home, went to the palace of the king and laid a complaint against my mother and her sister, her elder sister. So the king summoned all three of them to his presence and listened to them, and then gave them 3 days to settle the dispute amicably and report to him. Well, 3 days later they went back, and my mother and my father were still bickering. The king got very angry because he thought my parents were being disrespectful, and he said, I'm going to settle this dispute right now to teach you a lesson. So he ordered the calabash of doom to be brought out of the sacred chamber. And the calabash of doom was something very, very serious then. The women were not allowed to handle it, and it wasn't brought out every day, so it was brought out only on special occasions. So the priest brought the calabash out of the sacred chamber, and all the king had to do was touch his tongue to the contents of the calabash of doom and invoke death upon me. And I was going to die within 7 days, and nothing would save me from death. So as he lowered his head to lick the contents of the calabash of doom, his eldest wife sprung up and snatched the calabash from him, crying, "The child is innocent. Why do you want to kill him?" The king looked as though he was going to go after his wife, because women were not allowed to touch the calabash of doom. But then he settled back down and, addressing my parent, he said, "Let this woman's courage and love be a lesson to you. Draw inspiration from it and settle the dispute in the best interest of the child." Well, my mother and my father couldn't believe it. It was an 11th hour reprieve, because they knew they had lost me. So my mom put my father aside and said, "Raouf is your son, but stay out of his life until he's old enough to live with you. Stay out of his life." And my father promised to stay out of my life. And he did for 20 years. He could have made trouble for my mother and my stepfather, because he was a powerful preacher. He was famous. He had powerful friends. But he decided to keep his word to my mom. He did come to our house once. I was maybe 10. I had no idea who he was, but I was very friendly to him. And I brought him water. And I spoke to him as though he was a friend of long standing. I had no idea who he was. The day my mom and my elder mom told me the story, my mom said, "Do you remember that day when a man came to the house? You were 10 years old, and you were so kind to him. You brought him water, you sat next to him." And I was wondering what was going on. I couldn't remember. I simply couldn't remember. And she said, that day, after he left, she wanted to hug me and say, "Raouf, that man you thought was a stranger, but to whom you were so kind, is your father." I said. But she couldn't say that, because I was still too young to know, to find out, to know the truth. And you know, I tell my friends, I tell my students, God's time is the best. I think I was fated to be reunited with my father at 20 years of age. And when the moment came, it happened. And I knew he loved me, and I knew he stayed out of my life because of the promise he had made to my mom. And I knew he loved me, and I knew I loved him. And we didn't need to communicate through words. Just looking at each other, just holding each other's hands was just magical. And we were very close. We were very, very close until he died in 2006, quite suddenly, and he was 110. Until the very last moment, he was very strong, very healthy. 3 years before his death, my wife went home, and as she was getting ready to come back, she asked him, what shall I tell my husband? What shall I tell Raouf? And my father started jumping up and down and said, tell him I'm in the best of health. Tell him I'm wonderful. She couldn't believe it. He was 107 then. But he was a very simple man, very kind. He was a teetotaler, he wouldn't drink alcohol. But he loved laughter, he loved to laugh. And he loved to read. And he was an eloquent, very powerful preacher. The sound of his voice was so beautiful. He was a scholar in his own right. He spoke fluent Arabic. He was a translator. But above all, he loved people and he loved children. And he led a very simple life. Thank you.
This is his book, and one of the things that there's so many things in it, but there was a story. I wish we had time so that he could tell you how, in the midst of his education, the peculiar politics of West Africa, of Benin, said that he had to drop out of college and spend time in the military, that he and all of them had to do that, jeopardizing his chance to come to the United States to finish his education. And his adventures in the military are astonishing. So lots more stories in here, and I do recommend them. Thank you all for coming.